Right, well, there you go. Minister Stokes, distinguished guests, lovers of art and architecture and all things beautiful, including very small babies, small and perfectly formed, that I see around the place. On behalf of Street Level Australia, welcome to the launch of Sydney's beautiful architecture and urbanism competition and the exhibition of all these exciting entries that you've all been perusing in the last half hour or so. My name is Tikki Fullerton. I'm the business editor-at-large at The Australian. I would like to acknowledge the Gadigal of the Eora Nation, the traditional custodians of this land, and pay my respects to their elders, past and present. Well, here we are on this wonderful, balmy evening. I think there's been a run on the sparkling mineral water, probably. It's a very special competition, as I think you can see. And we're going to find out who the winners are of various prizes, and we're going to hear from the judges. So, from my point of view, we have a beautiful city, we have an incredible harbour, a bridge, an opera house, a customs house building, an incredible skyline. But then, when you move away from that to where we all live, I think you often find beauty's missing. Is it a lack of time, a lack of money, a lack of thought about clever ways of building places? And of course, Sydney, in particular, more than Melbourne, I think, has levelled a lot of its wonderful traditional architecture over many, many years, which is a sadness. So, here we are, talking about new traditional architecture. Tonight is about ideas, and in a moment I'm going to hand over to Millie Main, who is the great lady behind this grassroots mission to inspire better development. Now, of course, this is very much the philosophy of King Charles, who has his grand projects from sort of Poundbury to, I think, here in Glebe, and I think at least one of the contestants has connections there as well. But if I could bring everybody back to 114 William Street, which I would describe as spare, this ghost plot in Woolloomooloo and how it could be reimagined. I've often driven up Palmer Street, and at various times in my life, I've thought, why can't it at least be a car park or basketball courts or maybe a field full of sunflowers would be great. But clearly, that's where my imagination ended. And just look at what we've got here in this room. So, bathrooms at the back. Very important. This is open to the general public tomorrow between 9 and 12. International entrants to this competition do not know the outcomes of the competition yet, so you're welcome to post images of the exhibits to social media, but please do not reveal the winners, okay? Don't forget to choose your favourite entry and vote in the People's Prize at the voting table. Please consider making a donation to Street Level, which we're going to hear a lot about in a minute, if you enjoyed the exhibition. It's now my great pleasure to welcome Millie. Millie Main is the founder of Street Level Australia, and for those of you who haven't, I do encourage you to read her wonderful column in The Australian this morning, where she talks about, without beauty, we're walking with ghosts. Millie, I'm going to hand over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Tikki, and welcome all those distinguished guests. It's so great to have you here tonight. A lot of people put a lot of effort into the exhibits you see around the room today, so the fact you're here and all enjoying them is just going to be such a lift and a boost to these people who are here in the room tonight and all over the world. So a little bit about Street Level, because some of you are probably wondering, who are these people? Where am I going? What am I doing? Well, Street Level is a relatively new organisation, so we were only started at the end of 2021, and it was me. I was a strategy consultant, and I would find myself driving around my city, which actually happens to be Perth, just feeling a little bit despondent. And I thought, after the whole COVID thing, what's going to be my big shift? And it turned out to be Street Level, so I quit my job, started Street Level, and then within the space of about a month, I met all of our incredible chapter leads who are based around Australia. So the Sydney chapter lead is Sam. I hope you get to meet him tonight, and it has just been the most brilliant ride of friendship and passion and inspiration that I ever could have imagined. So I'm really glad to share that with you tonight. And as I said, I started street level in a little bit of a fit of despair, but also a fit of optimism, because there was despair, and it seems to me that we'd lost our collective ability somewhat to create beautiful places. And we were actually doing the opposite in many cases, and that was to our great social and spiritual detriment. But I was also optimistic because I saw incredible things happening abroad in this movement, which some of us call new traditional urbanism, new traditional architecture, and I thought, but this is like the places that I love in Sydney and Melbourne, and it's why I moved to Melbourne to study at Melbourne University, and it's the thing that makes me want to take a walk, get out on the street, meet other people in my community, and just generally makes my heart sing. So beauty. So I say that to some people and they think it's just mere aesthetics. But it's not. That kind of trivialises something that's profoundly important. So I ask you to consider, what if the built environment is a root cause of the loneliness epidemic, mental health, physical health problems, and social fragmentation? Because we spend billions addressing these issues in social policy. How about we focus a little bit on the root cause, which may be the fact that we have physically fragmented ourselves and that it may be the underlying hardware and not just the software. And you cannot leave beauty up to everybody else. I mean, who's looking after it? We're trying, we're kind of getting there, but we don't have any money, nobody's funding us, it's all we're all volunteers, hint, hint. And, so to some extent it's privatised. We've internalised it with luxury interiors and renovated historic homes, but there needs to be a collective will for beauty, otherwise you don't get it. Or you don't get it enough, right? I'm not saying it doesn't exist, but we need way more of it. So that's why we're all standing up for it, and why you should too. Because if no one, if you're lucky enough to have beauty in your everyday life and in the place you live, don't forget that every time you plan a building, plan a neighbourhood, invest in a property, select your super fund, manage your self-managed super fund, allocate your wealth, that you are making a call about where you're going to invest. And you're shaping someone's everyday life and experience. It's not just bricks and mortar. It's not just an index rate on a ETF. It's somebody's day-to-day, and it's fundamentally important. And it needs to be completely normal. And I'm speaking to all of our leaders in the room to sit around an executive or a board table or a parliament and ask for beauty, talk about beauty, and say, are we demanding beauty for our beneficiaries, stakeholders, citizens, and for future generations? Normal and not scorned and not, seen as something that's a little bit fruity. And the other thing that I want to touch on is we hear about density. Density is not what makes me want to get out of bed in the morning. So why do we have this political impasse in our neighbourhoods where we're building, apartment blocks to stop sprawl? And could there be less conflict if we injected beauty into the equation a little bit more? Because I think that when it comes to planning, we too often see people as units to be moved from A to B or stored in an apartment block. Housing is important, but we need to create lovable places for future generations to cherish. And so I've done a little bit of this. Excuse my passion, and I could rage about all the terrible things happening in the built environment, but as you'll see tonight, this whole exercise is about inspiring people for how we might be able to do something a little bit differently, and it's not everyone's cup of tea, and that's perfectly okay. We're not forcing it on anyone. We just want a seat at the table. And I believe that in the words of Chesterton on Pissed Off Optimists, when you do love a thing, its gladness is a reason for loving it, and its sadness is a reason for loving it more. So, enough protesting and whinging and letters to the editor and, councillors bashing down their doors. We need to go out and do and and counter-propose and create and show them what we want, because otherwise nobody else is going to do it. And so I have some thank yous. And there are so many people that deserve thanks tonight. But first, our street level team, especially Sam Trahan, our Sydney chapter lead, who was so fundamental in making this initiative and event happen. Zachary Pavlu, our Melbourne chapter lead, Nashara Lyons heading up Brisbane, Jack Dodds from Far North Coast of New South Wales, and Cecilia Kent and Lucy Heath. Thank you to our sponsors, Common Grove. So Common Grove sponsored the prize pool tonight, and Modern House, which I encourage you to check out because they're about to launch a new service for fine traditional homes, and they're an estate agency. And the good people from 5X. So it's great to see a developer investing in beauty, and we are so privileged to have your support. Thank you to MJ Sadie Architects for sponsoring the Youth Prize for secondary school students. So some of the entries you see here were done by 16-year-olds, if you can believe it. And my husband Dave for putting up the initial funding. As he said, don't forget to thank me because I'm your main philanthropist. And to our jury, Mike Day and Elizabeth Farrelly here tonight, and Richard Economakis and Nia Burris, who are based in the States. And a very special thank you to every architect and urbanist who entered the competition. Your commitment to beauty and the sheer amount of effort that you've put into this competition is absolutely incredible, and we wouldn't be here tonight without you. So I hope you get some business out of this. Make sure you write down the names of all the people who are on exhibit. Thank you.
Well, what a wonderful voice. Millie, that was terrific. And I think your message about what beauty does for the soul is such an important one when we're all there's so much noise around. And I would just add that thank you to those sponsors, but as Eleanor Douglas mentioned to me, you can hear the passion in your voice, and you did underwrite this thing, you two, so it's incredible. Thank you for bringing it to us. And so now it is my great pleasure to introduce to you Minister Rob Stokes, who's jumping in for the Premier this evening. Thank you very much for doing that, Minister. Now, the Minister is totally fitted and kitted out for this talk because he is the Minister for Infrastructure, he's the Minister for Cities, and he's the Minister for Active Transport. But this time last month, I think the Premier was opening the New South Wales Art Gallery. And if you look at it, I think at least one of these entries around here, that new area doesn't exist. So I think the reimagineering has been quite considerable in some of these. Anyway, it is my great pleasure to hand over to you, Minister, and give us a hint about the Premier's recommendation.
Thanks, Tikki. Thanks, ladies and gentlemen. I too want to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we celebrate this evening, the Gadigal mob, and to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. I also wanted to acknowledge all my elected colleagues here this evening, in the next few weeks anyway. So to Jamie Parker, our local member here in the New South Wales electorate of Balmain, Chris Rath, who's from the Upper House, and obviously Elizabeth Farrelly, who is standing for the Upper House as well. And at this juncture, can I also say, can you just empathise with for a moment how terrifying it is to address a room full of architects in front of Elizabeth Farrelly? I suspect that's the main reason Dom's not here, actually. He was too terrified, so he's left it to me. But I'm also similarly terrified. Can I also acknowledge the first ever female New South Wales government architect who is doing such an incredible job, Abby Galvin. It is extraordinary that in 200 years of the office we haven't had a woman who has done that role, and Abby has done it, in my view, just as well as all of the men put together. She's been an incredible government architect. Also to Dr. Deborah Deering, who is the Acting Chief Commissioner for the Greater Cities Commission. and an incredible planner, architect in her own right. And also to Adam Haddau, who is taking over as the incoming president of the Australian Institute of Architects New South Wales chapter or division, I think is the correct nomenclature. And everyone else who is here as well, particularly to the sponsors. Thank you for working so hard to support the initiative of Millie and the team. To Millie, because it's important I acknowledge Millie's incredible work because you don't get to acknowledge yourself. Thank you on behalf of all of us for your courage, for your vision, and for the way in which you've inspired a whole bunch of particularly young people around this idea that our cities can and should be beautiful, and that as citizens, it is our birthright, it is our expectation, and we should demand that, and we should demand it of not just design professionals, but for capital, for investors to deliver that, but they won't deliver it, of course, unless we ask them to. Also to Sam Trahan as the chapter president here in Sydney. Sam used to work in my team and my staff, and so it's wonderful to see people who I've worked with go on to do even more incredible and remarkable things. And to Tiki, thank you so much for your role as MC. Sydney was selected in the year 2000. I'm also mindful that we're all standing, so I'll keep my comments brief. If you weren't, I'd speak for 20 minutes or more. But in the late 1990s, Sydney was selected by the producers or directors of the Matrix films as a wonderful, stereotypical city skyline. It was selected especially because American audiences wouldn't know where the hell it was. It could be anywhere. That the central business district of Sydney was suitably bland or suitably similar that it could speak for a metropolis that could be anywhere on the planet. That was seen as something that was great for a film set, but it's terrible for a sense of civilisation. We should have cities that speak of our aspirations as a community. That should be a fair expectation of all those who work together to build our cities. It reminded me of that terrible indictment that Gertrude Stein, the American author, said when she was asked about her hometown, and she described it as, well, there is no there. Or Howard James Councillor, when his evocatively titled book about sprawl in America in the 80s called The Geography of Nowhere. These places that speak of nothing and nowhere in particular. That the idea that if it weren't for eucalypts that you wouldn't know, and you could well be in South Africa or you could be in America for eucalypts everywhere, but that it was only the biology that told you of the sort of built environment you were in. Rem Koolhaas talked about the detritus of modernity, the junk space of takeaways, of service stations, of parking lots, of all these elements of a global city that could be anywhere and nowhere all at the same time. It was traditional architects, actually, who actually led the campaign to fight back. And Leon Cryer, the Luxembourgish architect, who said the public will accept any city plan and skyline provided that its architecture is traditional. Now, my provocation to this crowd tonight is, yes, traditional, particularly in the old world, in which Leon Cryer was referencing. It's a little bit more complex and challenging and interesting in a new world setting where we are still in the process of determining what our traditions are and what our traditional vernacular actually looks like. We do have incredible echoes of what it can be. Close to my workplace, the New South Wales Parliament itself is an imported Georgian design with balconies or verandas imported from India to form something that is now identified as uniquely Australian. Or the fact that the ballast, the pig iron that came across in ballast on the clippers in the early mercantile period of Sydney's development became the cast iron or lacework around our terraces that make them so different to terraces in the terraces in Glebe are so different from the terraces in Chelsea or the terraces in San Francisco. We do have echoes of what an Australian vernacular looks like. Our challenge is to develop that more and more. Or even Federation architecture, often claimed as an Indigenous style, but it's really just an Australian interpretation of British arts and craft architecture, for example. Or I often am amused when people claim the Californian bungalow as an Indigenous style, and it's like, well, no, the trick's in the name, actually, there. Or Spanish Mission, again, the trick's in the name. Or the Dingback apartment block in California that we've interpreted as in this wonderful Australian expression of the sick pack that speaks to something that is a uniquely Australian-built form. So we need to develop not just the traditional, but the truthful buildings that speak of our environment, of our culture, of our aspirations, of our materiality. So often it amazes me when people try to create authentic-looking places using materials that don't come from anywhere near here. Of course, it looks like it comes from a long way away if we're using materials from a long way away. The materiality of buildings speaks to their sense of identity and place and truthfulness. But not so much also modernism and the utilitarian of modernity, but places that are magical, that are whimsical, that are delightful, that actually evoke a wonderful sense of spirit and imagination and magic. So not just traditional but truthful, not just modern but magical, and not a pastiche, but with a purpose. So often elements of architecture that serve no purpose without explanation can somehow seem foreign or out of place. A purposeful design often speaks to that idea of truthfulness as well. But finally, and I think most importantly, we want places that are not vanilla, but toward a vernacular. Something that speaks to our aspirations of what we want for our society, of the things that are important to Australians and the things that define us. The things that speak to not resisting our environment, but reconciling with our environment. One of the great things about Australian architecture is the sense of the element of shade. We've sort of designed through mechanism our way out of requiring shade, but shade gives this wonderful authenticity and a sense of place, because many parts of Australia are bloody hot. That's why I was actually arguing for why we should have lighter coloured roofs as part of our subdivisions, because it actually makes a great deal of sense in terms of energy savings and comfort and the affordability of the ongoing operations of a building, but it also gives a sense of where we are and therefore also who we are. So these are just some comments or some provocations about how important it is to aim for beauty. Millie mentioned about density. The question should never be about density, it's rather about design. And as we go from a suburban to a more urban form of development, that idea of design is going to become even more important as our buildings become more and more obvious and more bulky and bigger. The way in which they present to the public realm will become more important, not less. Now, because I'm on the way out, I get to say a couple of things that I wouldn't otherwise get to say. I noticed there was a certain developer lobbyist who was quoted in one of our records of note, the Sydney Morning Herald, said, and I quote, "The raison d'etre of a developer is, believe it or not to produce community benefit. It is first and foremost to deliver profit. It's not our job to deliver benefits for the community." That's appalling. We should not stand by and accept that sort of nonsense. And the role of us as a community, and yes, I have a particular role as a Minister of the Crown, but we have a democratic planning system in New South Wales. It's actually remarkable and appropriate how little power a planning minister actually has, because it's devolved. The principle of subsidiarity means that everyone has a right to participate. An OME is when people choose not to participate. This is Sydney is beautiful. As I was musing on this, it in one sense, is it a question, is it a statement, or is it a clarion call for action? I think probably the last is probably what it should be. It's a call or a vision for all of us to participate in. It's something we need to fight for. Developers often talk about sustainability, but I think often devoid of operational content, that's nothing more than just a fine idea. We need to think not just sustainably, but civilisationally. about the sort of community and built environment we want for our children, for our grandchildren, and for visitors and new arrivals to this country. Rather than thinking livably, I think this idea of livability, when you actually look at synonyms, sort of capable of sustaining life, I think that's rather a limited vision. I would have taken, of course places should be livable, of course we should be able to live in them, of course they should be able to sustain us, sustain life itself. But our development should be more than that. It should be laudable. We should be looking for a city that others aspire to emulate, others aspire to visit, that is a sense of what we make of ourselves and our aspirations for our future. Of course that will have echoes of our past, but it needs to speak as to who we are, so that when we look at Sydney, or any other Australian city, but particularly in the context of this evening, when we look at Sydney, we see a reflection of ourselves, not of New York, not of London, and not of Paris, not of Berlin, not of Shanghai, but a reflection of Sydney, of who we are and what we want our future to be, and what we want our message to the rest of our community and the rest of our society, both now and for hundreds of years to come. So these are just a few thoughts, and now I will go on to my official job as representative of the Premier this evening, which is to present condemnations, that's terrible, present two commendations on behalf of Premier the Honourable Dominic Perrottet. The first, I'll just provide it, is the professional commendation goes to Hector Abrahams of Hector Abrahams Architects, a local firm based here in Sydney, for the entry Robinson Square. And my job tonight is to say that the certificates are coming. Tonight is about making the announcement, so congratulations to Hector. And the commendation for the youth category, and I think I can also just comment briefly, it's extraordinary to think that these are young people of 16 years of age who are providing this level of granularity and detail and thoughtfulness and artistry and mathematical genius into their designs. I think that is extraordinary. So all the youth applicants should be commended and encouraged. But the commendation specifically for the youth category is awarded to John Paul and Joseph Fung, two secondary school students from New South Wales. So thank you very much, Tiki. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for your participation and your help in ensuring and continuing to advocate that Sydney truly is beautiful.
Well, Minister, thank you very much indeed for your thoughtful words, and I loved the way you took it up to this room on the fact that Sydney is still searching for its idea of tradition. Perhaps the scary Elizabeth Farrelly would like to come back on that. She has the podium shortly. But ahead of that, pics later, yes? Yes, I assume so. But ahead of that, it's my great pleasure to welcome the Deputy Lord Mayor, Sylvie Ellsmore. Sylvie is a member of the Greens, not a fan of Ayn Rand then, but I'm sure she hates mediocrity like we all do. She's also Deputy Chair of the City of Sydney's New Housing for All Working Group and pretty passionate about climate change and a city that is grassroots, creative and equal. So, Sylvie, come on.
Thank you. What a lovely introduction. I wasn't expecting that. So, hello, my name's Sylvie Ellsmore, and I'm very happy to be here tonight on behalf of the Lord Mayor, Clover Moore, who sends her sincere apologies. She would have loved to be here. Before I begin and make some comments on behalf of the Lord Mayor, I'd like to also acknowledge that we're meeting on Gadigal country, and particularly when we meet to discuss issues about physical spaces that make up our cities, who gets to control how our cities are developed, who lives in our cities. We remember that Sydney was established as a city without consent through dispossession, and this beautiful town hall as a community space which sits next to one of the oldest public housing estates in Australia, that there's still active conflict about who has the right to live in this city, and that our systems still have a long way to go before we genuinely incorporate Indigenous understandings and knowledges and expertise and priorities into how we build and shape our future cities. So I wanted to make some comments on behalf of the Lord Mayor, Clover Moore. I'd like to acknowledge the Minister Stokes and my Greens colleague, Jamie Parker, sure to retire, I'm sure he doesn't mind that, but also the many councillors in the room, obviously, local government, the most important but under-recognised level of government, from the City of Sydney, from the Inner West, and I think also from Parramatta Council. It's very inspiring to see the entries entered here into the inaugural Sydney is Beautiful prize, a way to celebrate beautiful architecture and promote good urban design. I congratulate all the entrants on behalf of the Lord Mayor, local and international, and particularly Millie and Street Level Australia for this initiative. The city shares your ideals of design excellence. The City of Sydney is a champion of design excellence, as many of you know. It has been an integral part of the city's vision for private development for a long time. The city has won 113 national and international awards for projects over the last 16 years. The city's values, our plans, our design excellent policy, our design advisory panel, I think some of the architects on that panel are here tonight, artists, sustainability experts, landscape architects who have helped transform Sydney into one of the nation's most livable cities. And it is possible and desirable to use development to benefit the city. And one particular example that the Lord Mayor wanted me to share tonight is the new 54-storey office tower at 180 George Street, Circular Quay, which provides significant public benefits to our city commercially and to our community. It's a fantastic story of cooperation and goodwill that can be achieved through working with developers in genuine partnership with the council. Put simply, the city owned part of a laneway on the site, which after lengthy negotiations was transferred to a developer, along with another triangle of land to consolidate the public space. Without the transfer, the tower would not have been built, and public art was a condition of consent, which has enabled building the beautiful Daniel Boyd Aboriginal artist's canopy artwork as part of the site over the new square. The 20-metre artwork is not only highly visible, but it adds to the amenity of this new public space. It allows sunlight into the plaza when the sun is low in winter, provides shade when the sun is high in summer. The plaza and the community building, and there's currently a consultation to find an Aboriginal name for that place, were designed in collaboration between Sir David Ajayi, I'm not going to have said this right, I so apologise, and Boyd, and were dedicated to the City of Sydney for the community. They sit above a public end-of-trip bicycle facility for 200 bike racks and amenities. The first 3 floors of that office space have been provided to the city for 20 years in return for additional floor space. The city is going to let out the 3 floors for 100 high-performing climate technology startups and scale-ups, creating 1,500 jobs in the first 10 years. And to complete the renewal of this northern part of the city, obviously the city is continuing to pedestrianise George Street, and we also had the opportunity to name 2 new lanes. Not often you get to create new streets or lanes, which have been named to recognise the first Chinatown in the city and the contribution of Chinese migrants to Sydney. In terms, just briefly to speak on George Street, it's hard to believe that George Street was once noisy, dirty, congested street. There's unanimous support across the council to improve public domain on that street and to finish the job. We have tree canopies that provide shade and comfort now, new street furniture, lighting encouraging people to linger, transformed laneways, public art, small bars, active streets, bringing private investment and better public use of the spaces. Obviously, we're all standing, so I'll finish up now. The city's ambitions are much bigger around the 3 Squares project. But the key thing is that many of our design projects are awarded on the basis of design competitions, much like today. They generate innovation, excellence, creativity from around the world. In 1957, the then Premier of New South Wales, Joseph Carl, announced design number 218 as the winner of the competition to design the Sydney Opera House, elevating an unknown Danish architect to the world stage. It's inspiring and just like the entries showcased today. Good luck to you all. Thank you.
Well, Sylvie, thank you very much, and reminding us that there are so many, there are other stakeholders in this whole space. I myself, if I could live with all my friends in a 3-storey Queen Anne Court of something, that would be really great. So everyone comes at this from a different angle, but it goes actually to the Minister's point of what we really think of as traditional for ourselves. So thank you very much for that. Now, it is my great pleasure to introduce, I think, both our local judges who are going to come up at the same time. They are Elizabeth Farrelly, who has been partially introduced, actually, by the Minister. And so many of you will know Elizabeth well. She is, an extraordinary Sydney-based author, architect, Director of National Trust New South Wales, and writer-in-residence at Sydney Uni's Henry Halloran Trust. And joining Elizabeth is Mike Day, who is a co-founder of Roberts Day. Again, so many of you will know Mike. He's an award-winning lead on urban renewal projects and new townships all over the world. So it's great to have both of you here. I should just mention Nir Barras in Washington of the Classic Planning Institute and Richard Economakis of the University of Notre Dame in Indiana, who were both valued jury members but can't be here today. But you're going to hear all the views from our two eminent judges. Please join me.
Is this what we do? Hello, everybody. So we do have certificates. Good. Welcome, everybody. It's great to see such a crowd. It's always hard to know with something like this whether people will support it and come, and it's great. Before I begin, I do also want to add my voice to the acknowledgements of the Gadigal land on which we meet, not least because I think one of the things that's really missing in our discussion about place and urbanism is the, if you will, the spiritual aspects of the habitat that we make for ourselves. And Millie's already touched on that, but I think it's really important and under-acknowledged in just about everything that we do, which has become so depressingly sort of instrumentalist. So it fascinates me. I was approached by Millie a few months ago to be part of this, and I thought, whoa, this is dangerous. Anybody who's been through architecture school will know that it's dangerous to go near tradition, to go near anything that might be called pastiche. And when I was at architecture school, postmodernism was in full flight, and nevertheless, which was 100% pastiche, really, and so is actually just about everything classical built since, Pericles. Nevertheless, it's dangerous territory, but I think it's really interesting and potentially really fruitful because we've lost so much, because so much of the question of how to make beautiful streets seems to be a lost art. I suppose I care a little bit less about beautiful buildings and making, even making authentic Sydney buildings than I do about making delightful public spaces, which in particular is streets, because that's where we live our collective lives. That is the theatre of our shared drama, and I think the loss of this is partly down to Thatcher's, there is no such thing as society, there's only individuals, which was such a big lie and has been so powerful in so many spheres. So I'm intrigued that, we all travel to the rest of the world, we all go to the famous cities, Rome and Paris and, Capri and Amalfi and so on, and we go there mainly for the architecture and the streets, the way that the architecture makes the streets. And we come back here and we trash everything that we have. And I just think it's bizarre. I still don't understand it. I find it fascinating because I like things that I don't understand, so I go on thinking about it. So it seems to me that we are kind of hopeless at recognising what we treasure and keeping what we treasure, and even worse, at replacing it with anything that we love, or can love, or might love, or anyone might ever love. And I think that is really interesting. So, Sydney is currently in the grips of the biggest building boom in its history, and that's saying something. Much of what we've loved about this city, what I've loved about this city, has been destroyed. There's still quite a lot of it left in various pockets, particularly in the inner parts, not because, I mean, maybe they were saved because they're the wealthy parts, broadly speaking now, but those old higgledy-piggledy streets and, communities and precincts and the fabric that sort of wraps itself over the wonderful topography and around the Baroque coastline of Sydney, and along its ridiculous, too narrow, impossibly planned streets, is still in part extant. And yet, some of it's been knocked down quite a bit. For example, Haberfield, WestConnex, etc. And almost all of what's been built, and is still being built, in place of it, is soulless and ugly and unlovable, and produces streets that are windy and kind of depressing, just depressing. And there are still, I live in Strathfield at the moment, and there are still dozens, in every direction from where I live, dozens of 15, 20-storey buildings, great big slabs which just cast shadows over public streets and do nothing for the street, nothing at all. It's deathly. So it makes me wonder, is the capacity to enrich the street with what we build a lost art? Is that actually something that we can no longer do in any reliable way? There are clearly one or two examples of such things done well in recent years, but they're so few, so extraordinarily few. So for all those reasons, when Millie called me, I said, yes, this is really interesting. And what's most interesting to me of all is the fact that it's been initiated and driven by someone who is not an architect. So who doesn't have that kind of, oh my God, I can't go there, that's too scary. Yes, I'm scary, but, pastiche is scary. And so I think that this is something which architects and planners and urbanists, and those are quite distinct species, as you know, should applaud. We should be thrilled that Millie has done this. Her extraordinary capacity to see what needs to be changed and to drive this project, which we should all have been driving for years, because we've all known that this had to be done, and yet the professions have been singularly missing from doing it and making it happen. So I think we should all applaud Millie, who's been brilliant. Fabulous. Anyway, so all of that said, it has been a real pleasure working with my co-judges, Mike Day and Nia Buras and Richard Economakis, who have brought to the discussions that we've had a sort of wisdom and scholarship, but also, I have to say, a kindness and a humour that's made it a real pleasure, don't you think? Yep. So it's been fun. We've had a lot of fun, Zoom notwithstanding. I think we didn't know what to expect from the entries. We were probably all a bit kind of, ooh, what's going to come? But we were pleasantly surprised. They're quite varied, as you would have seen in their approach. Some are very sort of hands-on, very detailed, quite particular, and some are quite abstract and more interested in producing kind of design codes, for example. But behind it all has been that question of how can we make better, more beautiful and more pleasurable cities to entice us not just into, being in cities, but in a future that we could make where hopefully we won't be travelling all over the world, flying to every other city in the world to see it, but we'll be happy to live in our beautiful city and to live smaller, more local lives, because what they give us is so much more rewarding than anywhere else we could go. I think that's the vision. Anyway, in that way, I think beauty, which we've discussed a bit and which is so seldom talked about, especially within the professions most concerned with producing it, for example, architecture, beauty becomes not just a kind of luxury or a sort of peccadillo, but actually critical to making a sustainable and climate-conscious future. So I think we should see it that way, as being absolutely at the core of everything we do. You have these theological arguments sometimes about beauty as being critical to our kind of moral standing, and I think it is, but not many people accept it. Still, let us, with all of that, proceed with some of the awards. I want to also announce a couple of the commendations. The first is by Historical Concepts, in the US firm. The design team included quite a few people: Kevin Clark, Clay Rukichi, Ryan Yokuba, Chris Carrigan, Andrew Seago, Christian Cullinan, Nguyen Hong, and Matt Gambetta. We thought, and here's the certificate. Yay. And I'm going to give this to Millie. Congratulations, Millie. Now we get to shake our hand.
Oh, yeah!
Really well done. You're going to love this. We thought this entry presented, now I've forgotten exactly where it is around the boards actually, but someone can point me to it, I'm sure. A dignified new vision for Woolloomooloo, a proposed return to the early aspirations of William Street as the Champs-Élysées of Sydney. It's a phrase that's sometimes bandied about. For example, in East Circular Quay, I remember that being discussed. Nevertheless, on William Street, which has been talked about as a boulevard since the 1971 strategy, it could be done. And this was a way of understanding how it might happen. Congratulations. And the next, we have two more, I think. The next commendation is Lucien Francois Stel of Cataxis Urban Workshops. Thank you very much. And congratulations again. I like this. This is great. Many congratulations. Cataxis Urban Workshops from Luxembourg and Victoria L.V. Schultz-Daubas from the UK for the entry, which is called Programme for a Civic and Cultural Restoration of Woolloomooloo. It was a delightful, sprightly and charming and quite romantic proposal, which we thought warranted commendation for that reason. The plan was a bit of a medley, a bit of this and that, quite heterogeneous, but quite interesting, and you could imagine being there, we thought. So that was sort of romantic and engaging. And the third commendation is from Adam Architecture from the UK. Congratulations, Millie. So their design team was Sophia Kelleher, Andrew Moneyheffer, that's a great name, Bianca Pagliara, Hal Mellon, and Robbie Kerr. And so this was commended for the complexity of the scheme, which sort of tumbles down the hill a bit with its intricacy and its beautiful presentation. We thought it had quite an interesting response to Sydney's existing built fabric in that kind of intricacy and the variety and colours of its built form. So congratulations to Adam Architecture. And so all of those obviously were international entrants, not here to take their awards, but I want now to hand over to Millie or to Mike. I think it's to Millie briefly. To Mike. Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Good evening, everyone. Could I just make a few introductory remarks, just reflecting on Tiki, the Minister, and Elizabeth's comments there. I think we're all in admiration of what Millie and her team have done. It's just been really quite a remarkable journey for me, just over the last 6 months or 12 months to spend time with Millie. In some respects, I think it's sort of reignited my passion for the craft. There are times when, I've despaired after, being in the game for 30 years. I think it's a number of the comments were made tonight, how we do despair about some of the urban form that's taking place. But I wanted to particularly just reflect on the Minister's comment about this notion of civic conscientiousness. And what we've been trying to do over the past decade or so is trying to reinstate the Art of Town founding. So, the middle of last century, there was no such thing as a subdivider or developer, and it's so saddening to sort of hear those words, come from an eminent developer on the eastern seaboard. But the middle of last century, there's no such thing as a subdivider or developer. You were a town founder. You had your bust in the town square. It was the most revered profession. It was above the lawyers, above the doctors. You were revered by your kids and your grandkids. You know, it's such a sad state of affairs that we've got where, you know, developers are reviled, and as a town planner, you know, we're badged as developers' bunnies. We're in the, you know, the pockets of developers. So it's really important, I think, that we do reinstate this art of town founding and town planning. And what Millie's done for me, I think, is just, as I said, just reignited my passion for the craft. Particularly, Millie, with the team that you've got around you, you're just marshalling resources, not just in Australia, but globally, and it's just so wonderful. And I urge you all to read that article, I think, that Tiki touched on, that was in the Australian this morning. It's not just that, just all the issues that relate to, you know, places of beauty, but there were some really important comments you made about some of the other partners that we need in the industry. You know, it's the institutions, and particularly the super funds and the pension funds, that need to come on the journey. You know, there's no more noble profession than laying the foundation for community and creating these places of beauty. So that's probably enough for me, because I'm aware of how long you've been standing, but just this notion of sort of reinstating this notion of town founding and our belief in a timeless urbanism is something that we really owe so much to you, Millie, and the team, so thank you. So it's my great privilege to run through some of the winners, but before I do that, I just wanted to state just how much effort's clearly gone into these proposals. And the entrants should be commended for their commitment to beauty and the championing of good placemaking. So I think that's the thing that, Elizabeth, that's really struck us as jurors, just how much time and effort's gone in, and the calibre of the entrants as well. And due to the high standard of the professional entries across the board, the jury's decided not to award a student prize. Instead, we've opted to award 2 professional prizes, a first prize and a second prize, as well as a youth prize for the secondary school student, as we mentioned. So what I'd like to do is just to firstly announce the second prize in the professional category, and it's the Winston Grand Prix Australia for Woolloomooloo Towers. And can we just point out where that exhibit is? Down the back. Just down the back there, yeah. Thank you. So, Winston, the jury was impressed with this entry and unanimously thought it was warm, subtle and deferential to Sydney's vernacular. As a whole, the building's composition and its recesses, shadows and sense of texture contribute well to a strong sense of place with admirable scale and character at street level. The jury gave Woolloomooloo Towers second prize despite the absence of an urban plan, which obviously was called for, but in recognition of the sophistication of the scale and the character of your submission. So perhaps more than any other entry, this composition respects and renews the existing urban character of inner Sydney, making it a potential and realistic catalyst for future urban transformation. So congratulations. So finally, the first prize has been awarded to MJ Suddy Architects Australia for Woolloomooloo Reimagined. So Michael's going to bring the team up, I think. Yeah. So he's got the team. So I would like to just go through the team. Yeah, no, I've got the team here. So, sorry, I did have the team here. So why don't we do that? Why don't you introduce the team? Yeah.
Coming up, there are a few hiding in the crowd. Coming up, Winnie.
So, okay, we've got them all. So we've got Winston Grand Prix, Taranpal Singh Tuck, Margot Rose Holbert, Matthew Walensky, Benjamin Rebecki, Kieran Hookway, Bulent Akpanar, Ashish Singh Punda, Henry Shkarinsky, Joshua Barrett and Michael Suddy. Congratulations. So if I could just give you an insight to the jury's determination on this prize. The jury awarded first prize to this inspired and comprehensive scheme with its clear vision for Sydney, beautifully presented. The proposal takes a clear position on defining urban space to establish an appealing street presence. Importantly, it sends a strong message about urban planning in Sydney. We must resume our efforts to build blocks and define streets again, as Elizabeth has argued, if our urbanism is to enrich public space. This approach to creating timeless urban places that are highly walkable conforms well to the brief. The jury respected the narrative behind the vision and the manner in which it pays homage to local heroes Juanita Nielsen and Jack Mundy, valiant defenders of local heritage and history. Such a proposal to develop this area respectively could bring new life to the valley whilst protecting its scale, heritage and the community. The proposal has a potency and a momentum that, notwithstanding its visionary and playful aspects, is a clarion call for greater and more purposeful place-making that Sydney as a world-class city deserves. So thank you, team. So just following on from Elizabeth's commendations and prizes, the second prize in the youth category for secondary school students is Brandon Bozas from USA. And I think we mentioned that Brandon's 16 years old. Yeah. So in particular, the jury thought this entry was competent and well executed with good use of scale and perspective and highly adaptable architecture. So Brandon seems to have a bright future ahead in urbanism and architecture, so we congratulate him. Okay. The first prize in the youth category for secondary school students is John Sutty, obviously from Australia, and from the Sutty Practiceship, who's again 16 years old. The skill demonstrated in winning this youth entry is impressive, especially for a person in secondary school. In particular, the vertical hierarchy is sound, with distinct fenestration and a fine sense of crowning feature. The rendering also shows considerable skill. The jury congratulates John and wishes him all the best in his future career. Thank you. Thanks a lot. So just in closing, I'd really like to thank our sponsor, Common Grove, who contributed the professional prize pool for today. So can we just thank our sponsors for that? And on that note, I think I might hand back to Tiki.
Well, actually, it's my turn. The last people that are yet to receive great indulgences are Mike and Elizabeth, being our wonderful jury, and they spent many hours deliberating and discussing and dealing with all kinds of eccentric architecture.
Well, look, congratulations to all our winners. That was absolutely incredible. I think, Millie, you actually do get a prize for the best receipt of a prize. But the greatest prize for you is what Mike said, which is when someone like Mike said, what you've done today is reignite his passion for the craft. I think that's your prize. So that is quite enough for me. Millie and I have both done enough step-ups to get a glass of white wine, I think. But you all go there first. Do please mingle and please enjoy this evening. And thanks again to the Minister for joining us.